I want to start with a quick question to everyone, just to get us warmed up, going back to the start of all this and the overarching theme. What does data-led tenant experience mean to you? Elizabeth?
To me, it means sort of digitalizing almost the what goes on in our buildings. So whether that comes from how the buildings are used, to numbers of users, to how they feel when they use the space. So that data that currently we just either get anecdotally or by guessing or by using our own experiences, it means gathering that data and then using it properly to make people enjoy it more in the future, to deliver the comforts that they can get at home when they come to the space, and being able to tell them it's busier at this time of day or it's busier at that. So, and similarly, this is how effective the building is and how efficient, so that it actually feeds into their own business strategies as well.
Excellent, thank you. Great start. And Jon, yourself, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think coming into 2019, 2020, we've done a good job at looking at our core property leasing sort of data and how often occupiers stay. And we'd already restructured how we'd actually get better engagement at the building level. So we looked at our partners that could sort of carry our message, but also sort of flatten that communication from our asset managers down to building managers. So we'd already started looking at that, and we'd started doing a lot of surveys in buildings to get direct feedback, both from the sort of tenant lead, but also building users. And we had that started to come in. I think really we then started seeing how we needed more information or data points to pin back and find out the root cause, because often when you ask open questions, you get quite a vague sort of output, and you're trying to gauge at a distance. What is that experience actually? What are they actually trying to get to? And I think without then building out sort of sensors and more detailed or structured use cases to actually identify the source problem, you're really just going off those anecdotal messages. And beforehand, that was going through a long sort of chain of building manager, property manager, once a quarter to the asset manager. But we'd already started working and getting people closer to the building. And I think really, and we covered it over last year about how do you get to the nexus of what is the point that people are preventing them from maybe going back to the office. And we tried to keep all our offices open, and we did, but it's trying to get that wider message and communication, because obviously we've got our building users that have been working from home, and it's how do you facilitate that sort of message of what's happening with the asset in the meantime.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot for us to unpick there. That's great. Thank you. And Mike, your thoughts on what data-led tenant experience means?
I think, as I think Elizabeth alluded to, I think it very much depends on who the tenant is and what the property or asset is, because there'll be a very mixed expectation in terms of data from different tenants in different properties, ranging from build to rent, where there's an expectation that there's a lot more technology in those types of properties, through to logistics parks, where the onus on interaction with a tenant maybe a lot less, and the data that's collected is a lot less as well sometimes. So I think it's a real mix. And as I said, a lot of it's down to expectation of what tenants expect. I think COVID has sort of pushed us forward a bit in terms of interaction with tenants and engaging with tenants through technology. That's definitely we've seen a take up on that in the last year or so. But I also think the other thing to remember is, and this probably applies more to office than anything else, but you could apply it to other sectors, that when people actually go back to work full time, the landscape I think is going to be a lot different. How people's working week pans out could be completely different, and what will be really interesting is collecting data around that to see how that evolves, because I don't think anyone really knows exactly what's going to happen there, but certainly there will be changes, I think, and tracking and monitoring those changes is a very important thing to do, I think.
Yeah, quite right. We're definitely going to come on to discussing this whole hybrid experiment that we're going through in this transition period now. And Dan, last but not least, waiting patiently there.
I kind of agree with everything that's been said, so I'm not going to say anything particularly different. I think it's worth just reflecting on the property industry's history of using data. We're often accused of being quite behind the curve, but we've actually used data pretty well for a long time. The difference is the data that we use is very building focused. So everything that we do is about the buildings. And we've gone through the change over the last few years. And I would argue that COVID has just accelerated this enormously about being people focused. And if you have all the data you want on a building, if you can't correlate that to how that impacts people, some of which is very anecdotal, some of which is quite easy to measure, unless you can understand those correlations, it's very difficult to really then improve performance. So data-led tenant engagement here is about making sure that you're led by evidence to improve the experience for the customer, not just focus on the building itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've heard mention of different sectors. John talked about offices. Mike touched on the difference with logistics occupiers. Are there particular sectors that are leading the way, do you think, that are further ahead with the whole sort of data adoption and how that feeds into running buildings and improving the experience for users? Anybody want to be bold and dive in there? Dan, sure.
So I'm happy to have a go. So I think there are a couple of things to say on this. So firstly, I think sectors, as we've traditionally seen them, are starting to blur a lot. So there isn't such a clear line between all of them. But that said, if you look at a typical office of a few years ago, if you've got a 25-year lease and people are there and they don't want to move job, then actually it's not a very liquid market. It changes very, very slowly. So the sectors that have been ahead in this are the consumer focused ones. So retail is the best example, hospitality. But I think that's all starting to change. And we've seen with things like co-working in offices, everything is moving significantly quicker. So we're having to catch up very fast. And if you look pre-COVID, a lot of the people being employed into the office market was actually from the hospitality sector rather than the traditional property sector. So I think that we're changing very, very fast. I think COVID will have accelerated that. The sectors themselves are certainly at different stages, but I think there's a blur and a crossover between those as we move forward.
Yeah. You touched on COVID there. I wonder, maybe a discussion for another day, but I wonder whether everyone ordering pints in beer gardens on apps is going to accelerate the consumer adoption, and that feeds through to business as well. See if those sort of things stick.
Well, so I was just going to say, I think from a consumer point of view, people are already past that. I think that most people who use our buildings are used to using an app for pretty much everything already. They then get into a building and then pick up a piece of paper and start writing on it. And I think their consumer home experience is already past that using that.
Yeah. And Mike, would you say from your sort of client base and where you see implementation, that there are certain sectors that are stronger than others?
Well, through the pandemic, I think, yeah, definitely. There's, we've spoken about retail, and that's obviously taken a hit when it's been shut down in the way that it was, and that hit there may be an overhang from that where people do shop in a different way, and there's much more online shopping going on, usage of online apps to shop with, etc. And that's obviously had the knock-on effects onto the logistics sector. The other area that's really changed for us, and we see it changing all the time, is co-working and reassigning assets to different sectors. So and this whole sort of lease reform area that's going on in the background of leases coming to an end, then short leases being taken, shorter leases being taken, or flexible workspace. I think the residential side of things, we've seen that's been quite steady throughout. I think because there is a demand for build to rent properties, so that hasn't really been affected that badly. It's some of the construction projects might be behind, but no, I think those are really, and the office is, like, as I said, everyone's sort of waiting to see what happens there and how this working week pans out. And not everyone works in an office, but people that do, that used to go 5 days a week into London, is that going to change? Is it going to be 1 or 2 days a week that you spend in London? which case do you bother with a return ticket, or do you stay in a cheap hotel in London? Is there going to be more demand for that, that sort of hospitality sector, because there's going to be this, sort of moving working army of people that come in and out of London, but they stay for 2 days, and it sort of interchanges on different days of the week. It's going to be quite interesting as to monitoring that and tracking how that evolves, I think.
Yeah.
I think one of the key things we've seen is that we're not really focused on one metric. It always has to be the whole picture. So we're very good internally at having different sector meetings. So we have office, industrial, retail, build to rent. We have those sector meetings, but there's also a few of us that span across the board. So when we see tools or analysis or the thought pattern happening in a sector, it's like, well, how can we address that to other sectors? So there's things we can sort of learn from the sectors internally, but we're also trying to look at, it's not just one metric, it's about how all the metrics, when they stick together, what's that rich picture that the data is trying to tell us. So we might want to have a look at a new, in retail, new footfall type system, but we won't just be looking at that. We'll be looking at that in linking it in with things like Twitter reactions and car park availability. It's looking at all those other elements. It's just, I don't think we're seeing anything in isolation anymore. So that means that we need more data to give us more insight. And we're putting a lot of time we're putting into data tools internally now. And we're also trying to engage with those PropTech companies that have that sort of open framework to allow us to integrate the data. But we don't get the real detail. We just take the sort of summary level detail, because we can probably do more with the summary level, and also from GDPR, etc. We don't want the most granular level of detail, because for us it's across the UK. We can see how a trend is happening, and then when different asset managers do different interventions, we can actually then look at how that played out when we make a change. And I think with more tech that we're bringing in, it is getting closer to those end building users, and we're looking at that direct feedback, and because we're getting the frequency of data increasing, we can go, well, that comment was there and we know we did something last Tuesday, right? So it's not just in a quarter, oh, footfall's gone down 3%. It's like, well, we know we did these campaigns, online, we had so many more app downloads, etc. We can start bringing the sort of macro features into the interpretation of the data, and I think that's key, really. Yeah.
Lots of good points. Elizabeth, sorry, you want to come in?
Just from my point of view, in terms of following on from what Dan said, I notice in my own life, and sort of I think it's spreading to others as well. I want to be able to book something immediately at the time. If I want to book a table in a restaurant, I want to know then and there if it's available. I'm too impatient to have a call back even on the same day. Same with booking a hotel in the UK. I'll book it on an app on the way to the hotel, just so I can compare prices. So I think from hospitality, it's spreading into offices, in the sense that if I wanted a desk for an hour or half a day in a new city that I was moving to, I'd want to be able to book it minutes before I got there, turn up, use it seamlessly. And I think COVID has accelerated that, because people are used to QR codes now. They know how easy it is to search something quickly and book it. And similarly with people that didn't used to do online shopping, they're now used to that. So I think that trend should accelerate in the fact that we want things on demand easily, quickly.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there in terms of the human-centric thread through all this at the moment, about experience and luring people out of their homes back into the office, the commuter experience, if it's 2 days a week in London. There's a lot around that. There's also the very important point John brought up about action and what you do with it, and how you read the data. So you're not going down to look at everything that comes in, but just seeing the big summary flags that you need to see. I guess at the moment we're in this fascinating transition period. We've done the physical working, we've done digital working last year. We're now looking at doing both together and hybrid. And is there a new rhythm that developers, landlords, property people need to get into because you could spend all your time at the coal face of the data looking at things and probably get blinded by a sort of blizzard of the information, or you could leave it to a quarterly which is too slow and not checking in frequently enough. So but where are we now, and what would be your advice to other people about the right sort of rhythm to get into for when it comes to reading and taking actionable insights for your own assets and building management? Anybody want to set off on that that path?
Yeah, I think I could probably just come on the back of what Elizabeth was saying about ordering things on the app. And I think real estate is very people based still. So there's someone at the end of that app request having to fulfill a service or product, right? So what we've looked to make sure is when we've been bringing in some of the tech for that instant gratification, that our supply chain, our partners, it's not technology we're forcing on them. We talk to them about, if we're looking to put this in to do this, and how does that feed into your sort of supply chain? So, and I think having those open conversations means that when we're getting any sort of onboarding issues, they can feed back. It's not just here's the app or solution, you need to deliver it. It's trying to work with people to make sure we're getting that sort of feedback. I think that's quite key. And like I said before, we bring in a lot of data, but we focus on the key metrics that asset manager is focused on, or those people in the supply chain are focused on for that time. So all the other data metrics are there for later on analysis that we can do the big sweep up. It's probably not per quarter, it's probably over a longer time horizon. So I think we're looking for those trigger points. What is our sort of level of availability that we want to get to, or service level? So you can sort of red, amber, green those and track those from time to time. And I think it's trying to cut through that noise and giving people that actionable data. And there's a lot of work in there, because it's trying to identify, okay, well, that metric is now passed. We'll put that on the sort of second tier. Well, what's your next metric you need to bring up? And I think it's through having those other avenues of getting feedback is, actually, we didn't know there was a problem here, so we're now going to focus on that. But we would have never have seen that metric before that we knew that was an important metric, because we've got a different view of what was important. So I think it's all about getting a proper feedback loop.
Yeah.
I was just going to follow up. I mean, again, I agree with Jon's points. I think there are a couple of things that you said that are worth picking up on. So one is, where do you start with data? And I would argue this place to start is not with data. So you've got to know what you're trying to find out and why. There are some benefits in collecting data if you don't have a clear view, but generally speaking, if you just go out to collect data, you'll spend all day collecting data and then you'll get completely blinded. So what do you want to know is the first thing. The second thing is, I think as we go into this world of blended work, some people are going to go back to the office 5 days a week. Some people are going to work at home 5 days a week, and some people are going to want something different or somewhere in between. It'll come down to your job type, your type of company, the culture. You may well find two identical companies competing in different ways. So one has an amazing office to attract people to, the other one capitalizes on reduced costs and access to a much broader sense. And there are upsides and downsides to both of those. The problem is that means that from an office point of view, or an occupier, an employer point of view, you're now having to collect data on people when they're in their homes, when they're working, and how far do you take that? So there are a lot of challenges that come out of that as we move forward. So I think start with what you're trying to find out, be very people focused. But the real challenge here is, how far do we go and why are we doing it?
Yeah, good. Mike, what would be your observations from the way that you've seen people best use Yardi services?
Well, I think, like, when we're talking about data, not necessarily from a Yardi perspective, I think the way that a lot of organizations operate dictates how data is held and how data is collated. And you can have, there's a number of different approaches to that. You can have, single stack systems where all the data is being held in one system, or you can have multiple point solutions. And there's pros and cons for both of those. Obviously with a single stack, you have everything in one place. With point solutions, you are having a constant task of pulling data together. But I think, and the other thing to throw into there is, often the landlords aren't directly engaged with their tenants. Some we have clients that are both outsourced to managing agents, and some do everything themselves in-house. And the ones that are in, more of an in-house model are generally much closer to their tenants, because they're dealing with them on a much closer basis, and it's them that's charging the rent, service charge. They're picking up help desk calls, and using an FM system to run that help desk, and planned and reactive maintenance as well. So that relationship is a lot closer with that model. I think sometimes with the managing agent model, albeit that the managing agent may actually use the landlord system, so all the data is actually held in one place, it sort of removes the landlord one step away from the tenant sometimes. But we're seeing, I think, landlords want to become engaged landlords, where they can actually have that contact with their tenants. So they're using things like portals that are all part of the same system, but it's an option that they may not have used before. And I think, going back to the human-centric question, there's a lot of this data is human-centric, but more and more we're hearing about ESG is coming up more and more and more in every sort of meeting that we go to. That seems to come up. So some of it is human-centric, a lot of it is statutory, that is going to have to be held and reported on.
Yeah, and we've talked about the sort of cost in terms of time that can be spent if you're not careful with how you approach your sort of data strategy. But what about the monetary cost and the returns, the investment aspect of implementing new data solutions? Are companies still seeing it as a cost? Is it seen as part of R&D in property these days? Is it an investment in improving the product? How do your organizations and the people you work with view the whole sort of cost benefit equation? Elizabeth, can you share any insight?
I have been through this process very recently, and the cost isn't necessarily a concern, because there are many ways for me to justify to back up why new technology could benefit us in so many ways. My only hurdles were coming across trying to demonstrate that it wouldn't be a complete waste, i.e. we could implement it and then there would be a resistance to people downloading it, putting their details in, and therefore it just sits there as a unused piece of software and then becomes redundant and we stop using it. So I think the challenge isn't necessarily about the cost, but I think we are all beginning to understand benefits of new technology. It is just making sure that it's used properly, everybody is communicated properly so that everybody understands how it's going to be used, and that sort of big question on data privacy, security, who owns it, that sort of thing. Once those are answered, then everyone gets pretty comfortable.
Yeah, and I guess that's important for brand, isn't it? Especially a good marketing brand such as Allied London that has very big, well-known developments. You don't want that to backfire, let alone the internal waste of implementing something that people don't use.
So I was just going to come in there on exactly that point and follow up to say, actually, it is sometimes hard to justify the cost because there's not a direct return investment. I would argue very often it's the other way around. Can you afford not to? Because over the next 5 or 10 years, you are going to face some substantial problems from the use of data. Lots and lots of benefits. And if you take action now, it doesn't need to cost much, doesn't need to be difficult to address. But in 10 years' time, if we haven't dealt with them now, we're going to be facing, as individual companies or a sector, real problems with legalities, trust, and in particular brands. And we're a sector that unfortunately doesn't always have the best reputation to start with. We can't afford to risk that going forward. So I'd argue the cost here is actually, can you afford not to start talking about data and technology?
Yeah. John?
Yeah, we've recently just finished a multi-year program to really make our system sort of data-led. So we've now got efficiency that we've brought in from our front to back office. We're using the same data from managing agent through to valuer. And I think the time saved by those people in that chain means that they can spend more time getting closer to the occupier. right? So we're trying to use that data as much as possible to create the information rather than people put it into Excel or into Word to create the output report. So there's a lot of benefit through there, but I think there's that element around net zero carbon and ESG. There's regulation there. There's the amount of transparency we need to have. I think as a as an owner of choice, we're trying to drive that agenda, and we can lead there. But also, it's trying to then get some of that data sharing from our occupiers, and some occupiers that are also leading on the area are quite keen to share that. But these numbers across all of our buildings goes into the L&G Group annual report. So we need to get all of this from every single asset we have, from the industrial unit to a shopping centre, up into our group annual report. So it's really quite key to get clean and quality data. And then we've got other systems that look at how we're going to track the forecasting of those sort of demands and metrics that we need to show that how we're being proactive in our management of those assets for the environment.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And anything you wanted to add, Mike, on the on what you've heard there about costs and returns? Is it something that needs to be a big expense for companies, or are there easier ways to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably coming at it from a different angle, because we're one of the companies that's selling it as opposed to buying it. So. But it's, from my experience, something has to have a benefit in order to justify its existence within an organisation and deliver a return. And it's we have clients that are all different sizes, and the return on investment can be much quicker with one client over another, and it can be much more of a necessity with one client over another. So we mentioned build to rent, and the expectation from a tenant in a build to rent building is that they have an app on their phone. When they move in, they can book things through that app. We spoke about brands. That app has to be able to be white labeled for for whatever the branding is behind that platform or scheme or development. That's a given, and sometimes the residential market is further ahead and things like that. But we have to be able to now offer it in the commercial market as well. Not just offices, but retail. The whole managing of outlet centres and shopping centres, that's going to become a lot more fluid, I think, with turnover rent, with sales figures coming back. So these are all, sometimes we drop down into different sectors, but they're all benefits that come out of each, applying it to each sector, but underlying it is a core database that it has got a lot of information, over and above the specific sectors, and we're finding, organisations get to a size and then they have to do something, or they're at that size and something isn't working, so they have to change, or they're a startup where they realise actually the only way we can grow, in a sustainable manner is to put technology in.
Yeah, it becomes critical, doesn't it? And Dan, we've talked around privacy a little bit, but what's your prediction as somebody that's really looked into the heart of this and it is doing some very important work around trying to promote standardization and good policies from the top down? How do you think this will play out in the next 5 years or so?
So, I mean, that's a great question. There are two things there which I think are slightly separate. So one is the easiest one to talk about, which is data sharing. We're very, very poor at that as a sector, and there's some very good reasons for that. We've not really needed to a huge amount. But on the whole, if you understand performance, if we go back to sustainability, for example, understanding the performance of an asset in isolation is only of so much use. What you really want is to be able to understand how it's performing in relation to other assets and what you're doing and how they're impacting it. So to do that, you have to be able to share data, and that then goes on to the data share, the trust, the IP, the standards, and that side of things. One of the other things which I'm conscious starts sounding negative, and I think all this use of data and technology is incredibly positive. It means that we can much better perform for the economy, for companies, for pensions, for the environment. But we're collecting more and more data all the time and not always thinking about some of the implications on that. So I think the ethical use of data is going to become a much more important thing for building owners and managers to start considering. That does, of course, mean personal data, GDPR, that aspect, but I think it's much broader than that. It's not just about the legalities, which are obviously very important, but it's about how do we trust people to use our data? How does it influence what we do, business performance, and so on? And so we're going to find that there are an awful lot of ethical challenges moving forward. And again, I think that's the sort of thing that if we're really thinking about now and on the front foot, is actually a very easy thing for us to build in and massively reduces at no cost the risks. I think it's the sort of thing, and we can look at other sectors where there are examples of this, where in hindsight to sort it out is very, very difficult and very, very complicated. So I think getting on the front foot with that and making sure that we're talking about it, which is what the Red Foundation is trying to do, is just make sure it's on the agenda and get people to start thinking about it, is the most important thing we can do to move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, just on that point around sort of data governance and security, through all our systems, there's only a few of them that actually have a feature where you can mark an individual as private, so that data then doesn't go through. So we've asked for that as part of our requirements going forward. And then with other people, they might have it in their system because they need the data. And then we had to work with them to not send that data to us. So I think some of it is the systems, but a lot of it is also investing in people in real estate that understand data and then can look at or know about these good governance features to insist those in your integrations and the solutions you're building. And I think we spent a lot more time in our sort of operating model on the people that are using that data. So where we have experts across the board, they can come to us, we're looking for this, and then the data expert in real estate can go, I know how to get that in the right way, and also make sure that those experts are giving us the sort of key features that they're looking for. So I think it's a partnership between the sort of skill sets in real estate that help as well.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. That's great. Elizabeth, did you want to add anything from your experience of how is there a sort of house policy on privacy around data?
Probably, I suspect there is, but I was just going to add that in terms of the tenant experience, i.e. the user using some new technology so that we can gather that data properly, I suspect that for many, I think there should always be some kind of hybrid choice, i.e. sometimes I might want to use technology to carry something out, and sometimes I still want that human to human experience of being able to speak to someone, go somewhere. So I think if that hybrid offer works, I think it should all be able to be gathered still. I.e. I might sometimes book my coffee to arrive in my own private meeting room and it's just there and I've never even seen anyone. The next time I want to be able to go and queue up and have a chat with the person working there. But then I want all of the information to be in the same place, i.e. it just gathered that I've been there 5 times a week or whatever. But how that happens in terms of security and how much they know about whether it's me or I'm just a number, that will play out.
Yeah, the anonymized GPS and all that sort of stuff. Is there an example, sticking with you for a minute, Elizabeth, in terms of the best tech that you've seen, or the best example of using tech for improved tenant experience that you would say this is the one reason I would give you to do this to another developer or another person working in property?
I think in terms of on the offices sector, I think there are so many apps and companies trying to be implemented in our buildings that I speak to them. I listen to the solutions that they're offering. One really good one is some sort of service so that you have to open the app to use it, rather than just holding a list of nearby restaurants or something, because otherwise I would just Google it or happen to see it on social media or something. I don't necessarily think I'm going somewhere, let me open the app. So if the app, say, is also your key card to get you in through the door, you have to open the app to get in. It means you're not touching various things or carrying loads of things, you just have to carry your phone. Or booking meeting rooms, booking food to desk, checking availability, that sort of thing. They're the ones that I really back. And also just in terms of wider real estate, the sort of taking our data off spreadsheets which get out of date, having everything in one place so that if a tenant wants to report a fault or if they want to talk to you about their lease or something, it's not just through email or a call to a help desk. It's all done in one place.
Yeah, that frictionless comms is going to become a prerequisite now, I think. And John, you're nodding ahead to some of that, nodding along. Is there a sort of best example you would give of where you've seen tech and data used for the tenant's benefit?
I think it is probably around those sort of occupier apps. I think that is that's a one-to-one. That's owner to building user, right? That is as direct as you can get. And I think we did a lot of due diligence on that. There's many partners out there that you could choose. We go through a rigorous due diligence process, and a lot of that is around the data security. It's looking at the sort of agreements that those individuals are signing up, because when you go and get a security pass, you don't have to sign a massive digital legal blah when you sign up. So it's looking at all of that in the background, because it's our relationship with that individual and the company that's the occupier. We then have to look at how that app can sort of bridge into other solutions we've got, because we don't want to keep on repeating data and loads of sign-ups. It needs to be sort of integrated. And I think the idea is that we can bring the sort of high-level data back. We only want to know. I think that the things like when people see things on TV and they go, "Oh my God, they're listening to me." No, it's people like you. And I think we have to get to that point. It's building users like you. And then over time, hopefully, from that sort of sentiment analysis, you can say, if you're looking for more space, we know that these 3 properties in our portfolio fit that sort of feeling that you would get from those buildings. So I think that's the sort of way we're going. And obviously, we're going to need that data to sort of understand how people interact and use those features. And I think one of the key things around these apps that go to users, it will help us understand where to deploy CapEx. So at the moment, you've got asset managers deciding, I think we need 5 more showers. And it might be they need a different amenity on site. And I think things are changing so much that this gives us a direct sort of feedback to what is actually working well and what is actually required in that environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot of developers that we speak to that say, tell me how to design the next retail, the next office, the next industrial. Everyone is going through upheaval at the moment. Mike, are there particular clinchers that when you're across the table from prospective new client, the use cases that really hook people in?
I had exposure to, I had a lot of exposure to outlet centres with a client that we signed, and we were working with them for quite a period of time, probably 1.5 years, 2 years before we signed them as a client. And they had, it wasn't just in one country, it was in 10 or 12 countries across Europe. And I think what I wasn't used to, because I obviously dealt with like shopping centres and retail parks before, but how close the outlet centre owner was to they didn't call them tenants, they called them brands or partners. And that I think that was an example of how technology, that they had different systems in each centre across Europe. There was data all over the place, external accountants, external managers, and the whole project was to bring this all together on one system. And actually, as we went through it further and further, very demanding in certain areas. But at the end of it, you thought actually there's a huge benefit here from having this single stack system with a lot of data coming back and forth from the landlord to the tenant. So I mentioned things like sales figures, but promotions. The landlord is actively trying to bring people to the mall. Going to different tourism offices locally. Promoting the centre. And advertising and whatever else that they needed to do to get people there. And I think that was one sector I thought actually this is sort of leading from a commercial perspective, it was on a different level to retail, and you could see the benefits there, and you know, and how the tenants were, you know, reacting to it, and you know, had completely bought into it because they felt, you know, that they were actually part of it.
Yeah, getting really close, really engaged. And Dan, final thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think I'd probably make two slightly different points, although I agree with the points made earlier. Firstly, I think it depends on the customer. So I think you start with the customer and what they want. So for example, if you're going to do a tenant engagement or experience app for a residential building, you would still do something very, very different for a student accommodation versus retirement home. So I think you need to be very, very clear on who the user is and what you want to understand. And so whilst I don't think it's possible to choose one perfect solution is the best in class, I don't think any good use of technology is really happening anywhere without a good approach to data. And I think that the future of this will be a combination of that technology solution for customers, but also the data that underpins it and how we use that, which will include when you own two assets. One is a retirement home, one is a student accommodation. How do you then get the insights on both assets if you're delivering to different people? So I think being customer focused and having a good approach to strategy are the two keys.
Yeah, absolutely. And then bringing in the human knowledge and local market knowledge and experience and judgment and things that will hopefully keep us in jobs, and we won't all be replaced by bots in the future. But that's great. Thank you very much all for giving up your time and your input. Thanks to Yardi for asking Placetech to do this today.